A cold wind was blowing from the north, and it made the trees rustle like living things. I'm not Jon Snow or Ned Stark, and this isn't Winterfell or The Night's Watch, but it's certainly starting to feel like it. Thanks for inviting me into your home, long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' basement, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Welcome to Coast AM. I'm Richard Syrett, and tonight, this morning, we're coming to you live from Coast's Toronto affiliate Talk Radio AM 640. Here's a look at what's happening weather-wise, storm-wise around the country. A powerful storm walloped California and other western states Sunday, flooding rivers and shutting roads from mudslides. In a state that's been struggling with droughts for years, the National Weather Service is reporting that almost 40 rivers or creeks in northern California and western Nevada were flooded or threatened to top their banks. Snow is also expected in Nevada, and the northern Rocky Mountains could get several feet over the next day or two. Meanwhile, the eastern United States is experiencing cold temps the day after a massive storm dumped snow from Georgia to Massachusetts. The winter storm that left ice and snow across portions of the south and east was being blamed for at least 3 deaths. A chain reaction accident on a Connecticut road involved nearly 24 cars. Ice conditions in Alabama and Mississippi, where a former governor was hospitalized after he slipped and fell on his driveway. And at least 7 locations across North Carolina reported 10 inches of snow. The 3 deaths, incidentally, related to the storm occurred in Virginia, Georgia, and Kentucky, where roads were slick with ice. And have you seen what's happening in Europe? A deadly ice snap is sweeping across Europe, and authorities are struggling to cope. Migrants in makeshift shelters in Serbia are enduring below-freezing temps. 2 men died in the severe cold in Poland, with the total death toll from sub-zero temps has now reached 55 since November, according to Polish authorities. My wife, the mighty Aphrodite, her ancestral home is southern Greece, and she's been sending me pictures from friends and relatives there all day. There is snow in Santorini. In Kalamata, again in the southern part of Greece, where they rarely, if ever, see winter, people woke up this morning to discover their cars covered in ice. People don't know what to do. We have a friend there, Katie. She's been over here in Canada. In fact, she visited us one Christmas several years ago during a really bad ice storm. We lost power for 72 hours, record cold, icy roads unpassable, and she loved it. Well, this morning, Katie in Kalamata was showing people how to scrape ice off their cars. She's now a veteran of a Canadian winter. So, wherever you are, I hope you're safe, warm, dry, and above water. Seems like as good a time as any to talk about the weather, climate change, earth changes. Mitch Battros from the Science of Cycles will join me for 3 hours. He's here to warn us that we're closer than we think to a coming pole shift. He'll explain the difference between global warming and climate change. He'll also explain the effect of galactic cosmic rays on our solar system, sun and earth, and why a full solar eclipse can cause a spike in earthquakes, volcanoes, and various extreme weather events. We'll get into all of these and much more. Coming up next, Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. He's been on Coast to Coast a number of times, revealing deep and profound mysteries in the Bible, as well as some earth-shattering prophecies that appear to have been fulfilled in today's news headlines. Well, he's back to relate a story dating back to 1999 when he visited Cuba. Fidel Castro still ruled the tiny island nation with an iron fist, but for one brief month, and for the first time since he violently seized power in 1959, Castro allowed his country to be opened up to the gospel. By this, I suppose, he thought he could show the world that there was freedom, quote-unquote, in Cuba, an evangelical celebration that would span the island from the east, where Castro's revolution began, to Revolutionary Square in Havana, where he began his rule. Well, Jonathan Cahn went to Cuba and took part in that evangelical celebration in 1999, and he's here to share the story he hasn't told until now. Now that Castro is dead, it can be told. He's going to share a remarkable tale involving the prophecy of the Magi. You'll be along next to do just that. So, come on in, weary stranger, hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come gather round the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. This is Coast to Coast AM. I'm Richard Syrett. Why don't you stay a while? Jonathan Cahn caused a national and international stir with his New York Times bestseller, The Harbinger. He's addressed members of Congress and the United Nations. He leads the Jerusalem Center Beth Israel in Wayne, New Jersey, and is president of Hope of the World, an outreach to people throughout the world. His newest book has just come out, and it's already a New York Times bestseller, The Book of Mysteries. Jonathan Cahn, welcome back to Coast AM. How are you?
Great. Cold, very cold, but great. Great to be with you, Richard, and great to be on.
Likewise, thank you. Since last you were on, a number of things obviously have taken place. Give us an update. The Harbingers, a book that caused quite a stir, the ancient mystery that holds the secret of America's future. Have the Harbinger judgments continued? Give us a prophetic update.
Yeah. Well, one thing that just happened, the template behind the Harbinger, and for those who don't know, is that in the last days of ancient Israel, the signs appeared that warned them of coming judgment. And the eerie thing or the stunning thing is those same signs have now appeared in America of the same warning, the same order, this whole thing. Now, the thing is that since then, I'll just give you an idea. In the template of the Harbinger, the God that the Israelites were worshiping when they turned away from God was the God called in Hebrew Baal or Baal in the Bible. And the thing is that this is the God of the Harbingers. Now, could the sign of Baal actually appear in American soil? And the thing is, it would be very strange, weird to happen because most people don't even know about Baal. The amazing thing is this autumn, it happened. The sign of Baal, the Harbinger of Baal, appeared in New York City. They actually erected an arch, the arch that led the worshipers of Baal to worship this God. Now, this is the God of the killing of their children. It's the God of apostasy. It's a sign of a nation that has once known God and has turned away from God. Well, it appeared they reproduced the Arch of Baal from Syria, built it in New York City. I was there, actually witnessed it when they unveiled it. They had this big ceremony with Middle Eastern music, as if it was something you'd hear with the worship of Baal. And the deputy mayor of New York City gets up, and if those who know the Harbinger know that when these Harbingers appear, there's always some kind of statement made at the time where they say, we're doing this in defiance. Well, the deputy mayor of New York says, we are putting up this arch as an act of defiance, the actual Arch of Baal. So even that, you think it would never happen. It did. And I'll just throw in two other quick things. One is that, we just, of course, had this very dramatic election. And people don't realize that in the Harbinger, now I wrote the Harbinger not only, before this election, but before the election before, when I first wrote it, and in the Harbinger you can find Donald Trump. I was led to put him in there. I won't say where, except I'll say it's in the chapter called The Tower. And it's both a warning on one hand, and yet it was a real surprise. I think there's a lot of significance to what just happened and what's going to happen in America. But I'll throw in one last thing, because I know we're going to get into other things. But that is that what just happened at the UN, when America and the UN basically condemned Israel and basically called Jerusalem, it wasn't just we were against the Israelis being able to build houses. I don't know any other nation that's condemned for that, but saying that Jerusalem it does not belong to Israel, it belongs to the Palestinians. Well, the Bible clearly says that Jerusalem does. If anything does. And there's something called the Abrahamic Covenant, and that is that it's gone from Egypt, from the days of Pharaoh to the days of America, and it's like clockwork. Every nation that blesses Israel, and that's what God says in Genesis 12, is blessed. Every nation that curses Israel or the Jewish people is cursed. You can look at the fall of kingdoms, the fall of the British Empire, everything. Well, for America to do this is major, and the only kind of hope in this is that Congress just condemned this action and there'll be a new president. But a major thing, and the other thing about this is that if people look at the biblical end-time prophecy, they'll see in Zechariah 12, it says that in the end, not only is Israel going to be back in the world, that's true, it happened, it's back in the end times, but all nations of the world will condemn Israel, will come against Israel over Jerusalem. So we're actually watching this. I mean, it's crazy. This a nation the size of New Jersey, Jerusalem, basically a pile of rocks, and yet the whole world converging upon us. So these are very, very dramatic times.
Everything seems to be coming to a head, and there's a Canadian connection to the the possible future construction of the Third Temple, which is obviously another sign of the end times. There's I was reading this on WorldNet Daily, WND. There's a Canadian couple that have been breeding a type of goat, or sheep rather, a type of sheep that have not been found in Israel since the days of the First and Second Temple. And they have somehow negotiated. You can imagine how difficult it is to negotiate to get livestock imported or exported into another country. They've arranged for these sheep, these rare sheep that have not been seen in Israel since the days of the Old Testament. They're back there now. And somehow these sheep will be involved in perhaps the construction of the Third Temple.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like clockwork. First you have Israel back, 1948. Then you have Jerusalem, 1967. Then 1980, Jerusalem becomes the capital. You have these Temple Mount Institute and these who are recreating continuously the vessels of the temple. They're training. In fact, I heard they just actually there's a Sanhedrin that has not been for 2,000 years. That's meeting in Israel, and they just this year chose a high priest. And not only that, Richard, but in the mystery of the Shemitah, it identifies a certain year as Jubilee. Well, the Sanhedrin, for the first time in 2,000 years, they named a year as Jubilee was the exact same year in the mystery of the Shemitah. So things are happening. These are major, major dramatic times.
Before we move on to your remarkable journey in Cuba in 1999, and this story most people will not have heard, you have not told this story. I want to just touch very briefly on your new book, The Book of Mysteries. Just give us a taste of that.
Yeah, the Book of Mysteries is, if the Harbinger is the revealing of a mystery, the Book of Mysteries is the revealing of literally hundreds of mysteries, really what I believe are the greatest of mysteries, and many of them have never been revealed as far as we know. Mysteries of the end times, secrets of the hidden writings of the rabbis, mysteries of heaven, mysteries behind world events, the literal mystery of your life. I mean, I'm not talking about you, Richard, but everybody. Mysteries that you can never see in the English of the Bible, but that are hidden there. And there's a whole story in it that kind of takes you in with a man going to a desert and a teacher, a man called a teacher, every day takes him to mountaintops or caverns and reveals another mystery of God. So you're taken on this mystery. So it also becomes a devotional that in the sense that there's 365, so you can read it right through, or you can read it every day. And I'll just give you just a quick sample. I know we'll talk about one, for instance. One is called The Mystery of the Secret Angels, and that there are angels we know about, but there's something hidden in the Scriptures. You can only see it in the original language. There's a class of angels that are basically everyone who's listening to this broadcast has actually definitely encountered them in their lives, and how could you know if you are encountering them? And I'll mention one others. One's called The Seven Mysteries of Your Life, that there's a blueprint of your life hidden in an ancient writing that reveals 7 mysteries or 7 specific events that'll take place in your life, and how to recognize it. It goes back from a 3,000-year-old book in the Bible, and so it's really, the Book of Mysteries really is all over. And by the way, it's everywhere. It's in Walmart. You can get it there. It's online. It's Amazon. So it's everywhere, and you'll recognize it it looks like an ancient book, like one of the books in the book itself. And I believe if you take it, not just read it, but take it to your life, it can change your life. And thank you for letting me just mention it.
All right. So Fidel Castro finally died November of last year, November 25th. And you'll explain why you really couldn't tell this story until he passed. But you've now come out with the fact that you were there in 1999 in Cuba. This was a short window that this dictator opened, I guess, as a show to the world.
Yes.
That, yes, there's freedom in Cuba. So he opened up Cuba to the gospel. And how is it that you found your way to Cuba as part of that mission? Because, as we're going to discover, you gave this prophetic sign to Fidel Castro. It's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's really a story of how behind history is really a whole other realm, supernatural and the hand of God. And people don't know, and again, Richard, only with you have I really shared this in this way. So since then, it was, after I wrote it, but, this is the first time. I was asked in a secret meeting in a house in New Jersey, where I met a man from Cuba who said Fidel Castro was going to open up the island to show the world, 1 month event, going to let believers, pray and have the celebration, first time since the revolution. And we want you to come. You're a Jewish believer in Jesus. We want you to sound the shofar. That's what we want you to do. Well, a week before I leave to do this, a man from Cuba appears at our service in New Jersey, wants to speak to me. I don't think he knew about me or anything before that. And he had been in prison for his faith in Cuba. And he begins to speak prophetically to me, saying, you're going to go to Cuba as the Magi, bearing gifts, and you're going to enter places where nobody else has entered. You're going to enter the palace of the king. And now I'm praying. I don't know what this all means here, but I'm praying, what should I speak? What word should I give to the people of Cuba? And immediately something comes to me, and it's the message of the Jubilee. And that is in the Bible, it's Leviticus 25. It says, count off 7 sevens of years, so you have 49 years, and then sound the trumpet everywhere and proclaim liberty, freedom, and also restoration. Every one of you is to return to the land you lost. So in the year of Jubilee, whatever you lost, if you lost land, you lost your possession, you lost your freedom, you get it back. And so that was really Cuba, starting in 1959. They lost everything, really. And so I go to Cuba to proclaim this message. Now, it was very dangerous, Richard. There were people, there were secret police wherever I went, and to preach freedom, in this communist country, or liberty, very dangerous thing. But I was also led to bring something for Fidel Castro. And not that there was any guarantee of getting it to him, but I just had this sense. If the Lord opened the door, I'd bring him 3 things. One was a Bible in Spanish, one was a letter, a message to him, and another was a shofar, the trumpet of Jubilee, which is really the biblical sign of freedom.
This is a ram's horn that was used in the days of the temple.
Yes.
To sort of summon people to the temple for the sacrifices.
Exactly. And it was the thing that you sounded on the Jubilee to proclaim that. And it was actually the priests who sounded it, the sons of Aaron. I'm also of that line. I'm a son of Aaron. So it was very natural to do this. So I'm doing this. And as we go to the air, we're trying to get into Cuba, they stop us, all the police, and they're inspecting everything in the luggage. When they get to the shofar, they just wouldn't let us go through. They thought they treated it like it was some dangerous weapon. I decided to approach it. I take the shofar. I show the police how to work it. So let me blow it. So I sound it. They look stunned, and they let us go. And I remember we were told in Cuba, don't attract crowds, whatever you do. If it's not already planned out. And we went into this Cuban store, and they come out, there's a crowd of people gathering around our van. Some of the Cubans had spotted the shofar in the van, and they want me to blow it. I'm not sure if I should do this. But finally they said, come on, blow it. So I blow it. One man jumps up and he screams and screaming, and we're going, what's going on? And they tell us the man is deaf, but he heard the sound of the shofar. Now, in the following
wait a minute. He hadn't heard anything for years until he heard you.
Nothing. That's what nothing.
Wow. Maybe blew the dust out of his ears.
Yeah. And so we go around the churches of Cuba throughout the gatherings, and I'm sounding this message, sounding the shofar, and something happens in place after place. People in those churches, they come up to me in our group and say, we saw visions of you coming before you did, or we had dreams of you coming, we saw you, or coming as the Magi. And then it hits me, the word that the pastor gave us. The Magi had come to Israel in the reign of a dictator, Herod, a police state, back then, to witness a miracle, the newborn life of God. And so here in a place of poverty and persecution was this miracle that you have this beginning of this revival. You have the believers all over Cuba just really being birthed in this revival, and at the same time, we're there to bless them like the Magi. We're there to encourage them. Same time, as in the account of the Magi, there's opposition. There's a throne. There's an aging king on the throne. As Herod, Castro was a man of ruthlessness. He had secret police like Herod did. He would seek to monitor everything. He was kind of paranoid, and he was basically Herod was kind of alarmed by what was happening because it was a signal of the end of his reign there.
And I'm guessing Castro, like Herod, had spies following you everywhere.
Yeah, and even more than that, because we were told, and we were actually even told when we got to his place, that he was specifically watching me because everything what we did was we started, as you said, we started from the east of the island. It's like the revolution he did, ended up in Havana Square where he would come, but we were also on television, and so he sent out word, and it came back to us. He said, "Who's this man with a beard?" That's me, causing all this ruckus. And he all said, "What's this Jewish man doing with a Christian?" So he was watching me, and it was confirmed. They watched me very closely to see what was this thing. So it opens up, on the eastern end of the island, and I sound the shofar to open it up. And I was surrounded by communist leaders, and they're wanting to find out what's this Jewish horn, what's this about? But as you said, Fidel Castro was watching. And at the same time, as I'm speaking about Jubilee, my translator is basically ready to pass out because
Jonathan, I'm gonna jump in here. We're gonna take a time out. The Staple Singers will take us into the break with "I'll Take You There," and when we come back, you'll take us to Havana Square as we continue to discuss the Magi prophecy. Jonathan Cahn with us. The Book of Mysteries, right here on Coast to Coast AM. Stay with us. We'll get back to our conversation with Rabbi Jonathan Cahn and his historic trip to Cuba back in 1999 and the Magi prophecy fulfilled in just a few moments. There's no need to be alone. If you're tired of being alone, get on up to paranormaldate.com. I think they're closing in on something like 55,000 members, 56,000 members. Incredible. It's completely free to join and search, and you can use the code GEORGE for a sizable discount if you want to get further involved. It's also available it's for free on iOS and Android apps. Check out the new companion site as well, conspiracydate.com, paranormaldate.com. Remember, you are not alone. Just a reminder at the top of the hour, Mitch Battros joins us, The Science of Cycles. Back with more of my conversation with Jonathan Cahn when we return, right here on Coast to Coast AM. And we are back with Jonathan Cahn, The Book of Mysteries. Before we get back to Cuba, Jonathan, just a reminder, how do we get a hold of that book?
Yeah, The Book of Mysteries is everywhere, and it's you can get it from everywhere books are, Walmart to Amazon, online. You can just order it, and it's going to look like an ancient book, like what is actually in the book. So it's easy to recognize, but it's everywhere.
So you're in Cuba, this month-long celebration of the gospel that Castro had agreed to back in 1999. He wanted to show the world that there was freedom, which, it was window dressing, but you seized on that opportunity. And then you find, as you're moving you're beginning in Santiago in the east, moving towards Havana, you begin to realize that you're mirroring the account of the Magi in the Bible, because as in the Magi in Israel, there was an aging despot, King Herod. The Magi were there to obviously, to be in the presence of the birth of Jesus. You were in Cuba to witness the rebirth, I guess, of Christianity in Cuba. Continue on with this journey as you move towards Revolution Square in Havana.
Yeah. Well, all over the island are posters saying El Jubileo Viene, or the Jubilee is coming. And it had pictures of me sounding the shofar. Again, Castro is kind of like Herod was nervous, watching this thing. But on the way to Havana, we stopped for something to eat. I noticed a book about Fidel Castro and faith. I pick it up and I read it, and most people don't realize the name of Fidel Castro, Fidel means faith. And as a young boy, this boy named Faith begins to lose faith. And he tells the story how each year at Christmas time he'd write a letter to the Magi.
Oh, dear.
And we have no idea of this, And what he would receive is a cardboard trumpet, a trumpet. So, and here I am, and he began to lose faith because he knew that his parents were giving him that trumpet. So it all started with this boy named Faith, who first begins to lose his faith because of the Magi, or because knowing that the Magi are unreal, and the idea of a trumpet. And here we are bringing this shofar, or this trumpet, to him. And from this would ultimately come communism and prison camps and everything from this beginning. So we're heading there, and with the trumpet, with a gift, and as we get there, the last stop before Havana is a place called Camagüey. And my translator, named Felix, it's his last night to translate for me. And I didn't realize it. I didn't know it, but he was born in Cuba, this guy named Felix. And he lost his land. His family lost everything. Lost their farm, lost everything, fled to America. He grew up. Felix's life changed. He came to the Lord, and his dream was that one day he could return to Cuba, come back to his land. Well, here we are. They're bringing us that night to a place, to a farm in the middle of nowhere for me to speak, and I'm going to speak about the Jubilee, and he's going to translate. And I look around. Before we go on, I find Felix like in a daze. And I'm saying, what's going on? And he says, he's in a daze. He says, they just told me what this land was, because this farm is my farm. This is the land our family lost. We lost it in the Revolution, and now we came back to this place. Nobody knew it. And here we are preaching. The Jubilee says that everyone shall return to their own land, the land they lost. And so here it is. It's like our whole journey was this prophecy. And he comes.
Restoration. God brought him home.
Exactly.
But of all the places that you would go in this province of Camagüey, it was his farm. What are the odds?
Yeah. Forget it. No odds. And so the last night he actually is proclaiming on his land. And while I'm reading the scripture that says everyone shall return to his own land. So now he goes, and we head on to Havana. We arrive in Havana. There's 7 of us there at that time. The majority of them all of a sudden discover there's something in common, that they were all born in the year of the Revolution. All the people were there. And every day I gaze out at my hotel room. I see a castle, a centuries-old Spanish castle by the sea. I had no idea what it was. But
El Moro.
I got to go there and see what's inside. It was a Spanish castle. And we walk through the ancient chambers. We turn a corner, and suddenly we behold this massive painting that stuns us. It's a painting of the Magi. And it turned out that castle was a national symbol of Cuba. It was a fortress. And literally the castle is called the Castle of the Three Kings, or the Magi, the symbol of Cuba. And in the painting, standing next to the Magi, is a boy holding in his hand an object that looks like a shofar, the trumpet, the very thing I'm bringing to Havana.
And you had no idea about any of this?
No idea. The only thing, in fact, Richard, so no idea that before it happened is the pastor came, this guy comes from Cuba and gives us his word, and we didn't even know what it meant, saying you're going to go with the Magi. We had no idea.
A week before you left on this trip, this gentleman comes up to you while you're still in New Jersey.
Yes.
And he has this prophetic dream that he tells you that you're going to Cuba for this Jubilee, and you're going to sort of retrace or mirror the Magi prophecy.
Yes, and like the Magi, you're going to enter the palace of the king.
And now it's all coming true.
Yeah. And we go to a church. We go to a church of Havana. So the pastor's gone through persecution, and he's weeping, and he starts talking to the congregation. He doesn't know us. He said, but he knows we've come. That's all. He starts talking about a star appearing in the east, and he says these visitors have come following the star like the Magi, and I see them going into Herod's palace. Now you can see that with the Magi, they actually saw a star. Now we didn't see any star. But you could say we saw, it was a spiritual leading, but one thing was missing, it was the star. And we joked to each other, say, well, maybe are we going to see a star in Havana? The day before the final gathering in Revolutionary Square, we decide to go there and beforehand and pray there, where the big evangelical gathering is going to take place and where Fidel Castro may come. And over the Revolutionary Square is a towering monument. A monument that's lit up each night, marking the square. It's called the Jose Marti Memorial. And it's from that site that Castro would often speak to the crowds. And I'm led to go inside. I go inside, and inside they give us each a button to pin on our shirts, and on the button is a star. And the government official begins to reveal that tower has been built so that from the sky it forms a star. It was the star. We were
Unbelievable.
It's marking the literal spot where we are to go, where we are, where it's going to lead us to, all these believers gathering for the first time in Revolutionary Square. It's like the birth, like the Magi, but also the Magi were led to Herod's palace. And right on the other side of that star is Fidel Castro's presidential palace. And and every night we would see this, that we'd look at the tower lit up and we'd watch it. We had no idea it was a star. So here it is leading us to our final place. So the final event comes, and in Revolutionary Square, and Fidel Castro is there and witnesses it, and their arrangements are made for me to go to present the gifts that I brought to Fidel Castro in his palace. And after the gathering is over, we receive the confirmation, and we head to the presidential palace. And I'm accompanied by one other person who's my translator, a different translator. I'm greeted there by one of Castro's high-up assistants, who tells us the commandant is very much aware of me, and has been watching me journey throughout. And I think back of Herod, who was watching, he wanted to watch the Magi and careful. So I bring inside, I present the gifts, the Bible in Spanish. I have my translator, and with a message to Fidel Castro and a shofar, the trumpet of Jubilee. And Castro would later seal this by sending back a word thanking me, and also an inquiry from the communist government about what this shofar was. What do we do with this shofar? Now, in that last gathering in Cuba, I was led not to sound the shofar, but rather to hold it up without sounding it as a sign of God's power. I never returned to the island or sounded the Jubilee shofar in the Caribbean until a number of years later. I was called to go to Haiti, so I ministered in Haiti. And at the end, I sound the shofar of Jubilee in the summer of that year, and the mission was to conclude on July 31st of that year. Now, if you look on a map, Haiti is right at the edge of Cuba, and that's where I'm sounding the shofar. First time I'm back there and sounding it towards Cuba. The mission concludes July 31st. When we come back, when we head from Haiti, come back to Miami, as we hit the ground, something happened on that day Fidel Castro steps back from power on that day because of health. He transferred temporarily, but that day is the same day that we sound the shofar. Now the transfer was just, he didn't end yet. It was a temporary thing, but the end of Fidel Castro was still in the future. Now, giving the trumpet of Jubilee to Fidel Castro was a biblical reminder to him of the power of God for freedom, and that it's bigger than the bondages of man. And the Cuban Revolution had caused millions of people to lose their land, their homes, their possession. Just and the Jubilee talks about the ending of that, or in some way. Now, it all began when Batista, the government, collapsed, and Castro and his guerrillas sweep into the city at the start of 1959. Now, what I'm sharing to you here is something. This is like amazing. It goes back to 3,000 years. That the Jubilee, the trumpet that I gave Castro, was linked to a mathematical timing, the countdown to the end of bondage, Jubilee. It says you shall count off 7 sevens of years, 7 times 7. It says you'll count up 49 years, then you sound the trumpet. What happens if you take the biblical countdown of the Jubilee, apply it to Fidel Castro's reign? It started in 1959, the moment Cuba loses all that freedom.
And you add 49 years, right?
49 years takes you to the year 2008. According to this mystery, 2008 would be a year of a release. Did anything happen in 2008? Fidel Castro's entire reign comes to an end in 2008. We went from 1959, 2008, constitutes 7 sevens, 49 years, Leviticus, 7 sevens of years. And in fact, if you take the day that he was actually sworn into power, which happened in February of 1959, and it was the third week of February, on Monday, go 7 sevens of years, comes to 2008, third week of February, on that Monday, Fidel Castro resigns from power. But
exactly 49 years, exactly, to the day.
Even more than that, if you take the actual day that it began, his reign began in January 1st, 1959. Take a jubilee of years and a jubilee of days, and it takes you from January 1st, 1959, takes you to the exact date, February 19th, 2008. February 19th, 2008 is the exact day that Fidel Castro's reign came to an end. And here we proclaimed that whole month, the Jubilee is coming, the Jubilee is coming. The entire reign of Fidel Castro was bound by this ancient mystery in Leviticus, that God is basically saying that beyond the power of man, beyond, just like with Herod, Herod dies after this, but saying that God is bigger than this and his power is bigger. The hand of God is the real story of history. And when I'm looking, I'm watching, the funeral, of Fidel Castro, and where they started it was in Revolutionary Square. And where they held it, all these people are pouring into one site. They're pouring into the star that's the same star which was symbolizing the birth of the new life and the end of Herod's reign. And Fidel Castro, with all that, he's the longest reigning real ruler in the modern world. It
Sure.
came to an end, but the revival that we saw begin has not stopped. Fidel Castro is gone.
Let me just recap that. You were in Haiti. You sounded the shofar in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And when you got...
Actually, that was 2006, which was when he... And on that very day, and that's right towards that's the very day that Fidel Castro temporarily resigned.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then when you get to the exact 49 Jubilee, when the thing we said, Jubilee's coming, the exact year and the exact day is the day that Fidel Castro's reign came to an end.
Remarkable. Are you able to share with us, Jonathan, what was in that letter that you wrote to Fidel?
I'll kind of paraphrase it, and that is, I said, it was about the shofar of Jubilee. I said, this is the sign of God's power, basically for freedom to the breaking open of walls, the breaking down of the blessings of God, and basically the end of bondage and the power of God for freedom. And that's exactly what happened, down to the countdown, down to the day.
Now, do you think that Castro, when you presented him also with the shofar, and as a child you mentioned, he lost his faith because he would write a letter to the Magi at Christmas. I mean, who does that?
Yes.
Who does that? And he was disappointed because all he received was a cardboard trumpet that he knew came from his parents.
That's right.
Do you think that he knew when you presented him with the shofar, which is a trumpet, do you think he made that connection? Do you know?
That's an interesting question. You know what? I wrote at the end of the letter. I wrote down. I said, "This is from Jonathan Kahn." I wrote down a Magi late in coming. Now, Castro is smart. Whether he did, I don't know. I hope that before he died, he made his peace. I don't know. I do know that there are people close to him who came to the Lord, who are around him, even when he died, even around. So I know that. I know very close to him. I mean, it's confidential stuff, but very close to him. So I don't know, but yeah, I wondered since that day.
And why is it you didn't feel you could tell the story until Castro died? Is it because fear of retribution for people still in Cuba?
Well, there are. I'll tell you. There's certain limits on what I can say, but yeah, I know people. I know of people who are, as I said, believers who are basically by the throne. I mean, right. In fact, kind of in the throne. And so I didn't want to say anything about this, public, until this thing, right. In fact, the fact that he's gone actually does make a change. And when he resigned because of his health, and basically there have been one step after the next step. It's gradually, but things have been loosening. There may be more crackdowns, but it's been loosening. So yeah, for a number of reasons, it's these things were done kind of in secret or kind of in the realm of God, and so I didn't want to say anything until basically there could be nothing that happened after that. In the story of the Magi, it says the angel spoke to Joseph and said, now you can come back because Herod is gone. So still, Joseph was careful, but he waited for that time. So same thing.
All right. Well, the big question is, where are you going to take your shofar next?
Well, I haven't even begun. I mean, yeah, Richard. There are many things that have happened. That is one of them. But which we could spend a long time telling you. I'll tell you one quick thing, which I also don't normally share, and that is that something else that happened in Cuba, and much more I could share. But one thing that happened on that journey, guy comes to me off the street and says, "I got to talk to that Jewish guy." And he talks to me. He says, before you came, a week before, all these believers in Cuba went up to the mountains and were praying, and we heard from the Spirit that there's a curse on this island, and there has to be a Jewish return to the island. So when we heard you were coming, we believe that's this. And then he points to me to this mountain and says, this mountain up there's a curse on it. God showed us this curse. They sacrifice to gods and idols and all that. There's blood, but he said the curse is going to turn to a blessing. But so I said, all right, God, maybe you want me to go up this mountain. So I go up this mountain the next day, and I bring my shofar, and I go up to the top, and there's a pavilion where they have all these idols. A man standing outside the pavilion sees me and he says, "Hola, Jonathan." I'm thinking, well, I sounds like he said, "Hello, John," but I don't know him. And I says it again. Then he comes over to me. He's holding a ceramic plate in his hand. The ceramic plate has a painting of me, and it has a painting of me sounding the shofar. And he says, "I've been waiting for you." And I'm thinking, we're all looking at each other. And I say, he's a believer in Jesus. He says, "God told me to come up here, paint that painting, and hang it up." He says, "But I got to tell you what happened." He hangs up the plate in the pavilion of all the idols, all the gods of Cuba, because they worship that there. And it says, but that night something happened. The leather holding the plate tears apart, or something happens. It comes down. It smashes. It hits the head of the chief god of Cuba, a god named Ochun. And the next morning, all the worshippers of the idols, they open the pavilion, they find their chief god on the floor with her crown removed, and they find next to it this plate of this Jewish guy blowing the shofar, and literally, it's where the sound comes out of the shofar. That's what struck the head of the idol. I still have that plate to this day. And
Jonathan,
they all took it as a sign from God. And then what happened is,
I got to run, Jonathan. I'm so sorry. Oh, what a story. Unbelievable. Jonathan, thank you so much. The Book of Mysteries, available everywhere. Here's the bard from Belfast, Van Morrison Caravan, taking us into the break. Mitch Battros, The Science of Cyclical. A worryingly large rift in one of the Antarctic's biggest ice shelves has been continuing to grow. In a recent report, British scientists have warned that it is very possible the ice will break away completely before the end of the year, producing a massive iceberg the size of Delaware. Now, the news is of particular concern because the ice in question acts as sort of a cork, preventing some of Antarctic's glaciers from flowing into the ocean. The crack has grown by over 17 kilometers during December alone and is now a total of 180 kilometers in length. If the ice does break away, then it could lead to a global sea level rise of up to 10 centimeters. Is this cause for concern? Well, I'll put that question to my next guest, Mitch Battros, who is a science journalist with Science of Cycles. He's coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. Mitch Battros is a scientific journalist who is highly respected in both the scientific and spiritual communities because of his unique ability to bridge the gap between modern science and ancient text. Founded in 1995, Earth Changes Media was born with Battros as its creator and chief editor. Now, Battros heads up Science of Cycles, which continues his research with special attention to newly discovered findings indicating a cyclical connection between our galaxy, Milky Way, with our solar system, Sun and Earth. Science of Cycles has quickly found its way in becoming a top source for news and discoveries in the scientific fields of astrophysics, space weather, earth science, and ancient text. Mitch Battros, welcome to Coast AM. How are you?
Oh, fine. Glad to be with you, Richard.
Pleasure. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. I know this is obviously an incredibly complicated science, but just give us, for those not familiar with your work, give us kind of a summary of how the Science of Cycles works. What's behind it? What's sort of underpinning this idea?
Well, let me start with your opening about the Greenland rift, because that pretty much goes right into what we're talking about, what I study, and what I found out. Now, part of that news, which is sometimes omitted, let's just call it editor's choice, which is fine. I'm not complaining about that. I don't think there's anything mischievous about it. But sometimes they leave out certain things when reporting stories, although there are many times if someone is a pro-global warming person, they'll probably lean that way and so forth. So let me give a little bit of balance to your Greenland article. What they're finding out about the rift and having to do with tectonic plates and the ice shelf and the whole bit is that this has happened many times before, and there's plenty of evidence of these cyclical events, which is why I've launched Science of Cycles, studying over 21 years now And first with the Sun-Earth connection, I've now ventured beyond our solar system into our galaxy, and the Milky Way's connection with our solar system, our Sun, and our Earth. And in that study is this enormous amount of data supporting cyclical events, timely events, some segmented events, such as short-term cycles, long-term cycles, cyclical events of a decade, cyclical events of 100,000 years. So that brings us back to the Greenland ice shelf. That particular area has seen what's happening many times before. And now let's talk about the cause. My studies show that what Earth is going through is a very natural consequence of warming and cooling cycles. Right now we're in a warming cycle. Now, what the Earth does when it gets overheated is it sweats. And the way the Earth sweats, it sweats through mantle plumes. It starts to release the viscous iron molten rock that makes up the outer core. As the inner core heats up the outer core, and then it starts to sweat, having these vents, if you will. And that's exactly what's happening there in Greenland and in many, let's call them hot spots around the world, which not only causes volcanoes, which most volcanoes are submarine. They're on the ocean bottom at the seamount. Well, we don't see most of them, but that heats the oceans. Now, that mixture, of course, in some areas is going to melt ice, and guess what? In other areas, they're seeing a record increase in ice. And so that's this event that's occurring specifically to Greenland. Stuff just came out, 2 weeks ago, highlighting that the cause, in part, is the Earth's tilt. And in addition to the Earth's tilt, there is a kind of wobble that occurs, and many have recently found out, because now we have instruments to do it, is that what causes this wobble is not just external celestial events, but it's internal magma. And so it might bulge in one area, contract in another, expand in another area, and it causes a bit of a wobble. And then there's the more 41,000-year cyclical event we call precession, which has to do with the Earth's tilt. Right now, I think we're at about a 24-degree tilt. And that happens to coincide with the ice ages. So if I can get a little long-winded on this, or at any time, Richard, but please.
No, it's all fascinating. I think what you're pointing to, Mitch, is the unimaginable complexity. These, and I don't know to what extent all of these things are included in, for example, the modeling that supposedly is predicting, this rise in global temperature. Do they include the perturbation or the tilt? Do they include sunspot activity? Excuse me. When I look at the modeling that goes into the 5-day weather forecast, it works pretty well for 5 days, but you get out beyond 5 days and it gets a little bit dicey. Now all of a sudden they want us to believe that this modeling can predict what temperatures are going to be like in 20 years. And I just find that a little difficult to swallow.
Well, I think that's a great word that you're using, and that's modeling. Way back in the 90s when computers were just, starting to take off, there used to be a saying. It was called garbage in, garbage out. And basically what that meant is whatever you program in, well, that's what's going to come out in your models, if you will, in your platforms, in your formulas. So the answer to your question about are they including these other events such as Earth tilt and solar flares and solar cycles, the answer is yes and no. It depends who you talk to, and a perfect example of this is probably the biggest monitor that gets the most attention worldwide is what's called the IPC report, IPCC. That stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, they've completed their fifth dissertation, if you will, or their semblance of reporting. They're working on their sixth. In the first three, it clearly showed a total slant to global warming. In other words, man-made pollutions were the only cause. But beginning in the fourth, and specifically in the fifth release of their assembly, they are now including such things as volcanoes and solar events, which have a tremendous effect on climate. And personally, what I'm really appreciating about the IPCC, and believe me, that's a new word that I would use when I'm speaking of IPCC, when I would use such a word as appreciate. But now they're starting to get away from the politics so much and this idea of prevention, and now they're inching their way into preparation and preparedness. What that tells me is that they realize that some of the effects that are causing these warming and cooling events are totally out of our hands. And instead of channeling money, which really what it comes down to, through research and so forth, this idea of prevention, to start to spend that money in preparation. And when they do that, now we're talking about, okay, we can't eliminate some of these natural cyclical events that are going to happen and unfortunately in some areas cause catastrophes, but we can start preparing for such things. And one of the issues that they specify in the fifth report is that if indeed oceans are rising, and there's a lot of debate about that, that some of the low-lying areas are going to be washed away. So they have got away from, hello? Oh my
yeah,
God.
I can still hear you, but your connection is kind of cutting in and out. Let's see if we can survive until the break, and then maybe we'll try you on a different device of some sort if we can, Mitch.
Oh, absolutely!
But I am hearing you.
I apologize, Richard.
That's all right. Let me just ask you: do you subscribe to the notion that temperatures on the surface of the Earth are in fact rising? And then the second part of that question is, to what extent can it be attributed to man-made activity or man's activity versus these other things that you were talking about, the wobble of the Earth, the sun flares, undersea volcanic activity?
Well, that's another yes and no answer. Yes, we do contribute pollution and pavement of roads and just the sprawl of suburbanite and cutting trees and so forth. It does contribute, but it's shocking to many people when I mention that may be contributing as much as possibly 10 to 15%, a significant amount. Certainly we have control over that, but a vast majority has to do with pure, simple, well, not so simple, but these cyclical events that we now have the instruments. Can't say that 5 or 10 years ago, but today we can. We have the instruments which can monitor these things and go back in history through ice core samples, tree rings, and so forth. Now, our equipment and our ability to research such things is just a quantum leap from just 20 years ago. And what that is telling us, that again, that the Earth has seen all these things before, when we were here or not. Perfect example again, article 2 weeks ago about the Dust Bowl, 1930. I don't remember any SUVs running around in the 1930s. I don't see any pictures of such. I don't know if there were, what the population of America was, and were there any smokestacks everywhere. No, it's the 1930s. But yet there was this tremendous dust bowl. What was the cause? Natural cyclical events. And so I'm pleased to see that these kind of articles are being published now, and further studies are going into historical readings, and all the scientists, quote, mainstream science, or whatever you want to call it, that word mainstream is probably misused too much, that get on board with the James Hansen, who made up the name global warming in the 1988 Senate hearing. I mean, that's where it was born. There was no such global warming until James Hansen came up with his what they call the hockey stick,
right,
computer-generated deal.
And Mitch, in the early 1970s, they were warning about global cooling.
That's right. That's right. And so you did ask about is the goal is the Earth warming and is it cooling? The answer is yes and yes. It is warming in many areas, but not uniformly. Like I mentioned, in some areas, especially the Antarctic, ice is increasing. So that has to do with that it goes back to the Earth's inner core, the outer core. It's shifting and venting. The Earth sweats when it gets too hot, contracts when it gets too cold. And perhaps in another segment, I'll tell you what my research is telling me of what is causing that. What is contributing? What is the driver of these cycles?
Absolutely, we will get to that. Yeah, we have to get to the underlying causes of these cycles. I had just another quick question before we're heading into a break, and that is there have been times in the Earth's history when there was no ice at either the North or South Pole. The fact that we have ice at the North and South Pole, does that not mean that technically we are still in an ice age period?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer to it. That goes back to going back millions of years, and how accurate is our information, our instruments to tell us of what it looked like had the Earth, how far back do the cycles go? What I'm seeing in my personal studies is it goes back to the conception, almost from the time Earth was born. Where there was an initiation of warming and cooling trends. You say that there was a time when there was no ice, but prior to that, was there ice? And then you get into the continents and the continental shifts and the drifting gravitational pulls and so forth. I don't have the answer. I wish I did.
Well, the other question, and we can, I guess, start this conversation now and continue after the break, but let's get it started now. And that is, I began the show tonight talking about the bitter cold in Europe, southern Europe, Santorini. They have snow in Santorini, of all places, in southern Greece. I saw pictures of it today. It looked like a ski resort in Vermont. Unbelievable. So then the question is, are we, as some are suggesting, heading into another ice age? Some say we're overdue for another ice age.
Well, the answer is yes, of course. Where are we in that transition? That's the big question. And that was the big question for me when I was doing my research on the coming magnetic pole shift. Where are we in the cycle of a full pole shift? And that I want to take some more time with you on what I found out. But that same question applies to yours, and that is there a coming ice age? Absolutely. Where are we in the process? Where are we in that cycle? That I'm not sure. What I can tell you is that currently, just as you mentioned, they're simultaneous. cooling in some areas, warming in the others. And I can tell you that the Earth has seen that before. Geographically, I can tell you that that these areas were very similar. And then as we come along into the full magnetic reversal, a lot of people are wondering, does that mean that the Earth's going to flip? And if so, is the North Pole going to be south and south-north? Yes, the poles will be, but will the continents shift? You know, will Mexico have the North Poles? Will Mexico have Greenland's weather? I don't think so. I think it certainly contributes to some climate change, and that in turn is certainly connected to these warming and cooling trends when there's an ice age and when there's not. There's some other unpredictable events that occur, such as asteroids and comets, that certainly play a role. That is more or less cyclical. I mean, we can tell when there have been times of more devastation, more crater events, if you will.
All right, Mitch, I'm going to jump in here. We'll take a time out, and we will continue to talk about climate change and get an actual definition of what we mean, or what you mean by a pole shift, as we discuss Earth changes with Mitch Battros, Science of Cycles. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Syrett, S-Y, because I love you, R-E-T-T. I was just reading here on the Smithsonian website, Smithsonian.com. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening and may be getting set to flip. In just a few thousand years, north will become south and south will become north. But before it can do that, the magnetic field may wander around a bit. Right now, say scientists with the European Space Agency, the Earth's magnetic North Pole seems to be wandering over to Siberia. The strength of the Earth's magnetic field is always changing, with patches of stronger or weaker shielding found across the planet. Right now, the weakest spots hover above the Western Hemisphere, whereas places around the Indian Ocean have been growing stronger. The wobbles in magnetic field strength, says Live Science, could mean that the planet's magnetic field is entering a period of flux that will last up to a few thousand years and may ultimately end in a flipping of Earth's magnetic poles. Earth Changes with Mitch Battros continues right here on Coast to Coast AM. Stay with us. Welcome back to Coast AM. Richard Syrett coming to you live from Coast's Toronto affiliate talk radio AM 640. Mitch Battros, scientific journalist, is with us. The Science of Cycles. All right, we need some definitions here. Mitch, help me out. What do we mean? What is the difference between a pole shift and when we have the magnetic north and magnetic south kind of drifting around from that story I just read? Is it the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing?
Yes, it is. And does this sound okay, Richard?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you, Mitch.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, it is the same thing, and that was a great article that you read. It's a recent article, and I can't help but mention that they are simply confirming my research. And this is all published. So I can sit comfortably when I say this. It was 2012 as part of my ongoing research when I started to shift from just the Sun-Earth connection to the Sun-Earth and galaxy connection that we began to see these patterns. And it was then when I was starting on my third book that I wrote about this. I came up with a second equation, which has been endorsed by some of the top scientists in the world, Deputy Director of the Space Weather Center, one of the directors at the European Space Agency, the director of celestial events at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and I could go on, but I say that just to reinforce that we're just beginning to know this. As I document in 2012, great to see it published in 2016. That I can't help it. Sorry, but it's very exciting when you put yourself out there, and I'm putting my reputation on the line, and I document what my studies say. And in this case, it was a home run. So yes, what happens is exactly that. What we'll see in an ongoing magnetic pole shift is that in its stage, in its later stages, which I believe is much sooner than that article says. In fact, I'm going to once again put myself out there. I will say that those that may be young enough now, and those that are being born in the near future, whoever is going to be around in simply 50 to 60 years from now, that they will see the very later stages of a pole shift, and that is just as you described. It's right now. It's kind of rolling around the North Pole, moving faster, about 10 times faster than previously recorded, which is also a sign of a coming pole shift. And then it will wobble. It will drop down in to lower latitudes. It may drop down into, say, Canada. It may drop down into Washington area or perhaps New York. But then it bounces back. That's what's been puzzling for some people. But historically, the records clearly show that that's exactly what happens. It's not a gradual process from north to south or south to north. It bounces around.
It's kind of erratic.
I'm sorry?
It seems to be kind of erratic.
It is. It's exactly that. And we'll maybe later talk about what causes that. But I think those that are living 50 years from now will actually see magnetic north drop down to the equator and then bounce back. Now, here's what's fascinating. In its very last stage, the flip can occur in a day. It's boom. It's going to bounce around. It's going to go to higher and lower latitudes, and then in a very rapid period, maybe 48 hours, I'm talking, maybe 1 week, it will have that full magnetic flip.
Well, and what does that mean for the inhabitants of this planet? Is it going to be noticeable? What's going to happen when that flip occurs?
You're not going to be flung off the earth, which some people do get very worried about that. They when they hear flip, they visualize a physical shifting of the earth. So rest comfortably that that's not going to happen. There will not be an enormous amount of crustal displacement, although there are some who can argue with some verified data that there is some of that could occur, that there actually could be some crustal displacement. But my research leans towards that. I don't think there's going to be any extinction. I don't think we're going to lose animals and humans or be flung off the earth. I think there could be some severe and rapid climate shifts. I think that's going to occur. And physically, Texas is not going to end up in Iceland and vice versa. There's nothing in the historical records or current scientific data that suggests such a thing.
I remember as a kid, Mitch, reading about these woolly mammoths that they found in Siberia. And it was like they were flash frozen. And inside their mouths were buttercups. So one moment they're in Siberia and they're in this lush meadow eating buttercups. And the next instant, practically, they're flash frozen. Was that as a result of a magnetic pole shift?
No, I think that might have been more the result of an asteroid impact or something of that nature, which of course would be immediate consequences such as that.
Sure, that could be a planet killer. Absolutely. Yes,
I would suggest that it might be something more in that area than an actual crustal flip.
All right, so let's talk about the underlying causes of these cycles that inform Earth changes. What causes these cycles to occur?
Well, great question, and exciting to me personally, because that's where my latest research has taken me. That goes beyond our solar system into the galaxy, and I stop at the Milky Way because our instruments can't go much further than that. But it's just amazing of what these instruments can do today. I mean, it's just mind blowing. The driving force, the source of all these cyclical events, which come from our galaxy, is something called charged particles. There are various forms of charged particles. People may be more familiar with solar particles, solar flares, coronal mass ejections. But that is actually at the lowest energy of the various charged particles that are out there. The smallest in size-wise, and but yet the most powerful, is what's called galactic cosmic rays. What initiates the galactic cosmic rays, or cosmic rays, is celestial events, interstellar events, such as supernovas. It's these exploding events that thrust this enormous amount of energy with these magnetic resonance radiation is what is causing, in this case, the Earth's natural warming and cooling events, but our solar system. All the planets are experiencing these warming and cooling trends. 10 years ago, we saw just incredible hard data that Mars, even today, even since the collision, that it's still experiencing warming and cooling trends. And that same effect is happening on every single planet, and it's the cause of this are these charged particles. Now, here's what's interesting. Going back 15, 20 years when I was focused on the Sun-Earth connection, all my energy was focused on what causes. Actually, to go even further, it was El Nino that got me started. It was the 97, 98, I think, was a severe El Nino. And I just come back from Saudi Arabia. I did a 2-year stint there and came back stateside. And I guess one of the benefits of having been overseas and working with these incredible people, really from 40 different nationalities and countries, was when I came back, I had no fear whatsoever of going right to the top and asking these very direct questions. I got on the phone, literally, and I called NASA. And I worked up the chain until I found the right people who could give me these answers. My question was simple. I said, what is this El Nino stuff? Okay, that's a nice, cute word, baby Jesus or something. I certainly, okay, got that. What is the cause? And guess what? NOAA couldn't answer that. First I went to NOAA, then I went to NASA, because when I went to NOAA, I said, the best they could tell me is, it's because of these ocean warming and cooling and the jet stream, and the jet stream has an effect on the ocean currents, and that's what happens. I said, that's great. What causes the jet stream to shift? And they said, we don't have the answer to that. We got to send you over to NASA. So I went to NASA. I said, hey, okay, NOAA told me about the shifting ocean currents and the shifting jet stream. Can you tell me what causes the shifting jet stream? Well, sure, Mitch, we'll tell you. It's solar flares. These solar flares occur. It's on a cyclical event, the 11-year cycle. You're probably aware of it. There's a solar maximum and a solar minimum. And during these times, the solar maximum, we have extreme weather events, and that contributes to El Nino. Oh, fascinating. How come NOAA couldn't tell me that? Well,
Indeed.
Going back 20 years, it was really, and I'm not kidding, Richard, it was as simple as the left hand did not know what the right hand was doing. It was that simple.
And how much How much of the warming trend that we experienced a few years ago, and some say that has now stalled, was attributed to El Nino, and how much of the cooling trend that some argue we are now in can be attributed to La Nina?
I laugh because I have a whole chapter dedicated to that in my first book. I titled it El Nino, La Nina, La Cucaracha.
Okay. Well, let's do the dance.
Because it was just that funny to me. You know, they just changed the name. It's the same phenomena. And when you get past these cute names and these shifting ocean and jet stream currents, is going back to the cause, and there it is. It's these charged particles that are slamming our ionosphere, and now we know it goes through the ionosphere into our atmosphere and right to the Earth's core. Now that's new information. When I addressed this and I proposed my hypothesis about this 15 years ago, I was slammed. I mean, I was shamed. They just, what? Are you crazy? There's no way these particles can have an effect through our atmosphere. Well, guess what? Beginning 5 years ago, new information has come out, and now they certainly see a correlation, a symbiotic reaction between solar and extrasolar events and shifting in our Earth's core, just as we discussed earlier, of the warming and cooling trends. When the Earth overheats, like a human, it sweats. And when it sweats, that's when we have an increase in extreme weather events, an increase in volcanic events, warming oceans, which cause other extreme phenomena, hurricanes, and so forth, all tied together. When the Earth finds its ambient temperature, which is what it's all about, it's about Earth finding its balance. Once it finds its balance again, then it'll shift.
And you're saying that most climate change can be attributed to, at the core, can be attributed to these cosmic rays. Now, I understand from your website that we have a cosmic ray monitor in India. Tell me about that a little bit. I mean, how sensitive is it?
How what? Say that again?
How sensitive is this device? How far out can it measure?
Oh, it's incredible what they can measure. I would say that probably the best instrument out there is the Swarm. Although there's others. It's the European Space Agency that has Swarm satellites. Now so we have both now. We have satellites in space and we have ground monitors. They both correlate, and so now we can, because of such, we can get a well-rounded feel of what initiates it, where it's driven, what causes it, where does it have the most effect geographically, which is a side note. Maybe you can remind me later. What's called the South Pacific or the South Atlantic anomaly. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Is that like an oscillation? Is that similar to
well, that's where they had something to do with like the Bermuda Triangle, where ships and boats, the magnetic all the instruments go away. Well, that's actually reality. That's a science fact, and that has a direct correlation to the bouncing around of this of the iron. If you can visualize a viscous molten, let's just call it lava or magma. That's the closest I can get to it. When there's a bulge or when there's a pool towards certain areas, it will have a stronger effect, and that's what's happening in the South Atlantic. So I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. I didn't want to go too far.
No, that's all right. That's right. We were talking about the cosmic ray, the land-based and the satellite-based cosmic ray monitors. That's right. Yeah, they're pretty darn accurate. They're getting better and better about that. They can see that the Earth's magnetic field is weakening. They can measure the amount of weakening that's happening. They can see the progression. And what's more exciting to me
is that they can now historically see where it's happened before and actually have a timeline. You've got to have a timeline if you're going to have cycles. If it's something that you need to present in a peer review, for example, you have to have some empirical evidence. Now, what provides that empirical evidence are timelines. In other words, repeatability. And how accurate are you in the repeatability? That's becoming really accurate, and that's simply solidifying my hypothesis that I've been publishing since 2012, specifically on cycles. Really drives home that the Earth has seen what we're seeing today many times before, and is a precursor, which is what's really cool, because if we have knowledge of a precursor, then we have maybe a little time for preparation, a little bit of understanding of what might be coming along. That's pretty cool.
And we also don't have to think seriously about dismantling our energy industry or our agricultural industry in order to try and forestall the inevitable. If it's based on cosmic rays and not anthropogenic global warming, then we can sort of preserve certain industries. We'll take a time out here with the Rolling Stones and a track off their brand new album, Blue and Lonesome. Back on the other side with more of my conversation with Mitch Battros, the science of the man behind the science of cycles. Will talk to us. He'll explain the connection between full solar eclipses and spikes in earthquakes, volcanoes, and other various extreme weather. And likewise, why a full lunar eclipse can also cause a spike in events, but for an entirely different reason. And time permitting, we'll also get into fracking and why that is a very bad idea. Bet you couldn't see that one coming. Bottom of the hour, we'll open up the phone lines and give you a chance to weigh in with questions and comments. Mitch Battros back with more on the other side, right here on Coast to Coast AM. Don't go away. Mitch Battros stays with us here on Coast to Coast AM discussing the connection between galactic cosmic rays and climate change. Now, I understand how you can measure the cycles of the sun, but when other types of cosmic rays, which may be caused by something like a supernova, that's not an anticipated event necessarily, is it? I mean, there are certain cosmic rays that happen for some chaotic reason, I'm guessing, like some sort of the explosion of some galactic body. I mean, how do you anticipate that? Well,
they can now trace it backwards. Now, boy, this is the full meaning of relativity. Absolute. We got to remember about relativity. So when something is traveling at the speed of sound or the speed of light, if they trace this phenomenon, they can trace the charged particles back to the source, which goes back, and now you have that time link means. Now you have those periods where you have the timeline, and so these are events that may have occurred thousands of years ago, and are now finding their way into our galaxy, which is just mind-boggling when you think about it. But the instruments now, first thing they have to do is detect them. So now they detect them, and then they trace it back to where was the source. And that can be a decade ago. That could be a millennia ago. So that's the answer of a measure of predictability related to galactic cosmic rays. Here's another one.
All right.
It's counterintuitive, and it kind of surprised me. But during the time of solar maximum, when we're at our highest time of solar activity and getting slammed with solar rays, with such things as these charged particles as solar flares and coronal mass ejections and so forth, that actually hinders the cosmic rays from hitting Earth. So there's a counterintuitive measurement, but it also gives a cyclical timeline. So we know that during these times of solar maximum, we can expect less or fewer cosmic rays finding their way into our atmosphere and into Earth. But right now we're in solar minimum during this period of solar minimum. So there is a much larger amount of cosmic rays entering our ionosphere and atmosphere.
Because of the absence of solar winds?
In part, that's right, yes. In addition to that, we have a weakening magnetic field. Now, for those that might not know, that what the magnetic field does for us is it deflects all these various charged particles from coming into us. If the magnetic field was not there, we'd look, and it was on a consistent basis, I might add, we'd look like Mars. But our magnetic field is there. There will be a moment, by the way, just reflecting back for a second, back to coming to a full magnetic pole shift. There will be a very short period of time that we can come close to 0 point. I don't think it ever reaches 0 point, but I think it kind of gets down there pretty low. That's when we'll be the most vulnerable for any type of cosmic events that could affect us. So two factors. One is that we're in solar minimum during this period, and we have a weakening magnetic field. The combination of those two, my studies would suggest that we can expect an increase in extreme weather events, volcanic events, earthquake. Oh, by the way, a bit of breaking news. This is in Alaska, and it's in the Aleutian chain. Just came through just 2 minutes during the break. That is now being moved. The name of the volcano is Bogoslav, and is now it's been moved to alert level warning. Alert level red, code red, and an aviation warning. There's two different warnings that come out for volcanoes. One is for aviation, and one is a volcano alert. So it's at its highest right now. It's both at code red and warning. That means that an eruption is occurring right now. Not that it may occur; it's occurring right now.
Right.
But
when
it's in a fairly isolated area. However, you have listeners in Alaska. It'd be great maybe later if they call in if they happen to be near these remote areas.
Absolutely, yes.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I went into.
Well, it's an important item that you bring up, because it leads me to the question of when a volcano, and I remember when those volcanoes in Iceland were spewing for several days, and it grounded air traffic across Europe and much of the world because it interfered with visibility and I guess navigation and so forth. But when a volcano, perhaps like the one in Alaska, when they blow, doesn't that, after it starts spewing all of that ash into the atmosphere, doesn't that undo all of our efforts to ameliorate our carbon footprint? You know, like a few days of that spewing volcano probably would set us back, I would gather, several years.
You're absolutely right. Oh, I laugh because I titled it the battle in Seattle because that's I'm living in Seattle. And I had on one of the head guys of the global warming guy. In fact, he's one of the leading chairpersons of the IPCC. Overpeck, I think, is his name. And he was telling me all about the pollution and all these things that contribute to it. And I said, well, Jonathan, what did I say? I forgot his last name. I said, well, Jonathan, what amount do you contribute volcanoes to in solar events? What about Soho? His answer was, "What's Soho?"
Right, right.
Yeah, he was totally, which really goes back to the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So, and the second thing he that we discussed was volcanoes. And he was clueless, which is shocking to me. And I'm kind of being harsh, but it was a fiery interview. It was great. Just loved it. It was a full hour of it. I asked him about various volcanoes, and when I think it was Popo was acting out, the one in Mexico. I said, well, how much does that contribute to pollution and climate change? And his answer was minute. That's almost irrelevant, which is absolutely false. Clearly, empirical evidence. I mean, I don't think you'll find anybody to argue it today. This was 15 years ago. That you're absolutely right, Richard. It contributes an enormous amount. A volcano such as Mount Mount St. Helens, I guess, was the latest biggest one, and Popo is another one. That it does set us back probably 2 or 3 years. You're absolutely right.
So
people don't realize that.
So, given what we know then about cosmic rays, galactic cosmic rays, and volcanic activity, what is the point, if of any, of the Paris Accord? Is it a complete waste of time?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Given what we now know, you say about galactic cosmic rays and their influence on climate, and also volcanism, doesn't that make the Paris Accord kind of moot?
Absolutely. I've written about this extensively, and I come at it from a point of view of resources. The way I describe it is, say we have a bundle of money. We have $100 billion. Right now, we are, up until recently, I think there's starting to be a little bit of a shift, that we were channeling all this money into some type of prevention, fueled by, in my opinion, kind of politically oriented scientists and so forth. I get a little cynical about it, I must say. So if you spend all that money in one area and you don't leave any money for preparation or preparedness, what's the point? And now I think what I'm seeing with the IPCC reports, there's beginning to be a bit of a shift of preparation. There are things that we can do about it. We're not totally powerless. I'd say we're in most ways, if not almost always, powerless over the events and the cycle itself, but we're certainly not powerless over a preparation or preparedness.
Right.
Things like horticulture, permaculture is another idea that I think makes a lot of sense to me. Those are avenues of preparation and preparedness. Not bearing your, putting all your eggs in one basket with the idea that somehow you're going to prevent these things. But we don't have to be a victim of it either.
No, let's learn to adapt rather than shoveling sand against the tide, which is, attempting to forestall the inevitable. Let me ask you about, before we take calls at the bottom of the hour, I'll work in a quick question here, and that is, what is the connection between solar eclipses and earthquakes, for example? Oh,
yeah, that's really cool. It's cool and it's not cool. It's cool in that my research it's just been dead on about this, and I've received some accolades from some of the major agencies, and that is specific to solar events. It has to do with rapid temperature change. There's some magnetic force involved, but a lot of it has to do with rapid temperature of heating and cooling. When there's a full solar event, it cools the Earth, and what we might think is brief and maybe not noticeable, but does have a significant effect. And this is what contributes to it's the rapid change. That's what I want to highlight. It's the rapid change that causes the shifting of tectonic plates. In many ways, it's a very vulnerable entity, if you will, and it doesn't take much for these plates to shift, or where there happens to be mantle plumes to have a surge, if you will, of activity. And so, yes, that is what occurs with solar events. With lunar events, or with a full lunar event, it has to do more with gravity. There's something that is not popular. The word, the description is not in a lot of the journals. I don't think I made it up. I'd be shocked if I did, but I call it fluid displacement. And so when you have these gravitational tugs, when even a supermoon, that we had the same effect as a full lunar eclipse, because of the rapid shift of fluids. It's not just oceans and water. Fluid also is oil and magma. That's all fluid. And when you have a shift and a rapid shift, that's what causes the tectonic plates to make these adjustments, if you will, and that in turn is the cause of earthquakes and volcanoes. And I've been able to confirm that. And this is the part that's not so good, is the devastation that occurs. I have a window. I call it a 14-day window prior to and a 14-day after following an event, a full solar or full lunar event. And I've been able to document it over a few decades. And down to the specifics, down to the certain days, clearly, every time we see a sharp escalation in earthquake and volcanic activity, every single time, not sometimes, every time, and specifically in those 14-day windows. And I document it with empirical evidence. So we have a next full solar event, full solar eclipses in August of this year, 2017. So unfortunately, or I don't know, fortunately, whatever, we have to wait until then so I can prove this theory once again. But already I've documented and published it of as soon in those window times. That's when we see 7.5 earthquakes, 8.0 earthquakes, unusual hurricane events, volcanic activity erupting specifically in those windows. And
well, as it applies to earthquakes, if there's a connection between earthquakes and the lunar eclipse, the solar eclipse, what determines then which earthquake fault line is affected?
That purely has to do with, and that I have not seen any studies that have been able to identify that. I think they're getting closer. But I haven't seen the instruments that have been able to measure the most vulnerable areas of the mantle. Where's the thinnest parts? Where are the areas that haven't had movement in a long time? Those would be the most vulnerable. The thinnest areas and the areas that have not shifted in a long period of time. Those are the areas that would be most vulnerable. But I haven't seen any map. I don't think they've gotten as far as being able to map the full mantle of the Earth. Other than that, we know there's the Ring of Fire. We know about that, and almost always, or mostly, that's where we see the activity occur. It's just much larger, but it's specifically where there's some people they're trying. they're really trying hard to predict earthquakes. Jim Berkman, geologist, formerly worked with the USGS, great friend of mine, unfortunately passed away not too long ago. Very sad. He supported my theories with his documentation of this fluid displacement, specifically of the fluid displacement, and how it has to do with the vulnerability, whether it be an ebb or a flow, if you will, whether it be an expansion or contraction, that wherever the areas of most vulnerability, and I wish I had the answer to that, then I think we might be better at predicting, not that it will occur, but where it will occur. There's been some study about, I think they call it earthquake lightning.
Earthquake lightning is let's just leave it there. We'll pick up on that point on the other side. I wanted to ask you about that. This, the presence of these strange flashes of light before an earthquake. What causes that? We'll get that taken care of on the other side when Mitch Battros returns, talking the science of cycles. And say hello on Twitter at Richard Syrett, Syrett. These are the struts. Could have been me. Well, never mind volcanoes and climate change or earthquakes or tsunamis. A new study concludes that ravenous zombie hordes would reduce the Earth's population to no more than 200 survivors within 100 days. The research published in the University of Leicester's peer-reviewed Journal of Physics Special Topics is a tongue-in-cheek analysis by physics students of a mathematical model that predicts the spread of disease. But in the model, zombies serve a deadly serious function to simulate how quickly a virus could wipe out the planet. When we come back, your questions and comments for Mitch Battros as we discuss the science of cycles right here on Coast to Coast AM. And we are back with Mitch Battros, the science of cycles, and we'll take your questions and comments. Mitch, before the break, you were talking about earthquake lightning, this strange luminous aerial phenomenon that people for centuries really have been reporting before, during, and after earthquakes. What causes it?
Well, it does have to do with the discharge, and they are seeing this this very same phenomena occurring in our upper ionosphere. I think the two may be connected. Related to earthquakes, it has to do with certain rocks. I don't, that's not my area really. However, I did have several interviews with Dr. Friedman Fruland, who works out at Goddard, and that was his main focus, were earthquake lights. And as he described it, it had to do with certain rocks. And what I visualized, if you ever smack two flint rocks together and you get the sparks, it's just not a flint type rocks. There's other various rocks that have that same type of discharge. In his research, it had to do in areas where there was a lot of basalts, which almost always has some relation to magma, to plumes, whether it be volcanoes or mantle plumes, types of crystals, and so it seems to have to do with the makeup of particular stones that are rocks that would be in the lithosphere, just under the crust. That's an area between the crust and the mantle, and the unfortunate side of this study is that in most cases it only appears anywhere from a few seconds to 1 to 3 minutes.
Right, so it can't be used as an early warning device.
it can't be used as an early warning device. However, there are some studies where they had maybe from 1 to 3 weeks advance notice. I don't know how that plays out. I mean, if you go public with that and you get it wrong, then that's the end of that.
Right.
And if it occurs within just seconds to a minute, what can you do with that? So it's interesting. I think more is going to come from this as we learn. I don't think we're there yet. I certainly wouldn't count on that as any measure of
right. But it is fascinating, as you say. Let's go east of the Rockies, and Jim is in Florida. Jim, welcome to Coast. How are you?
Hey, Richard and Mitch. Richard, you actually read an article earlier that had something cross my mind, and you were talking about how the magnetic field on the east is stronger than on the west, and it brought up a memory of another article when Michael Jackson died. Over 90% of the global major cities that are populated, it rained for 3 days straight, and the magnetic field globally dropped, and after 3 days, everything kind of went back to normal. So I'm wondering if there's been any research. This would actually be a good concept in studying for precursors on disasters. If magnetic field drops over a certain city, why and what's going to happen? Is there any research or studies indicating something like that?
The answer is no. I think kind of going in that direction would be probably Edgar Casey kind of stuff, which I think he's probably a really neat guy. I disagree with his analogy that we're somehow humans are the one or living entities or whatever is what causes extreme solar events and so forth. My studies are just the opposite. That the solar events or interstellar events or celestial events is more the cause of human unsettlement or wars and various things. But I guess I would steer you towards Edgar Casey. But that's assuming that you were implying that Michael Jackson's death had something to do with that. But that would be Edgar Casey kind of thing where, if there was a large mass of people, if that would have an effect. I don't know, Richard. Where do you think he was going with that?
I think that was the connection between Michael Jackson and, the rain of causing the people's emotions were somehow, causing this weather event to occur. I guess because of, profound grief, sadness associated with, the king of pop's death. That's what I gathered.
I would steer, I know there's a lot of literature on that. Edgar Casey is I think the one that's most quoted in that direction. I keep an open mind. I'm a little bit more on the tangible side, but I do keep an open mind. I certainly anyway.
Right,
okay.
But not so open that our brains fall out. That's important. Let me ask you about getting back to the shifting poles, magnetic north, magnetic south shifting. It can be gradual, it can be sudden. Is there, do you think, a connection between the drifting of these poles and this phenomena where we see birds falling out of the sky or whales and dolphins beaching themselves? Is there a connection, something to do with their navigation system?
Unfortunately, there is. Great question. And unfortunately, my research doesn't point in too happy of a way that there will be what I'm describing as selective extinction. And that is just the way you put it. Those animals and birds that are more reliant on a grid, on magnetic grids, are probably going to be the most vulnerable. And unfortunately, history does show that when we've had these events in the past, there have been at least 6 of them, probably a lot more than that. That only goes back a millennia or so, which is nothing in geological time. And unfortunately, associated with the magnetic pole shifts, our grid system shifts, that it did have a significant, if not severe, effect on plants and animals. That is true. And
what about satellite orbits and airplane navigation systems?
Oh, man, that is great. I'm glad you put that. That reminds me of I wrote a couple of articles on that, and that goes back to some really hard evidence again. The entity that has been most concerned about this, and a great barometer for all of us to start taking this very seriously, and also letting us realize how far along we are, not thousands of years. I know that's been thrown out there. I'm telling you, I'm putting my reputation on the line that it's going to happen in this century. I'll go even further than that and say that those that are still alive 50 years from now will see that magnetic north will bounce around so severely that it could end up in Texas. All the evidence is directing me towards that. Now, back to the FAA. The Federal Aviation Association is taking this deadly serious. They have gone so far as to have mandated all commercial and military pilots or anybody that has to do with aviation that they have to. It's mandatory that they have to recalibrate their instruments, and actually, rapidly. I think it's like every 3 weeks now, which is just mind-boggling. They have to recalibrate their instruments, and that the all staff members that directly have to do with the flights itself, whether there be pilots or what do you call the guys in the tower? I forgot.
Air traffic controllers. Right.
Yes, thank you. That they have to go in for a new study every 6 months. Not to say, but the classes. The exact term has skipped my mind. But they have to go every 6 months. They have to go to these classes that teach them about the magnetic flux. Now that's how serious it is, and that's how current it is. And I would also say that that's how far along we are. That the FAA is this active. Great question, and well, I'll tell you what's happening right now. A lot of people don't know this, but if you have any flights that go above 35,000 feet, all the staff members, whether they be flight attendants or pilots and so, or even frequent flyers, are being warned that they are only allowed a minimal amount of flights because of the radiation. And it also has to do with the weakening magnetic field. They're aware of that. They're aware that there's an increase of radiation now than ever before. They also know that during solar maximum, they are ordered to fly down from 35,000 feet to 25,000 feet because of the effects of these charged particles.
Okay, so you want to fly south for March break, or do you want to take that dental X-ray? You just pick one. That's it. You can only have one. Let's go east of the Rockies. Jack is in Jackson, Michigan. Jack, good morning. Welcome to Coast.
Good morning, gentlemen. I appreciate the valuable information that you're spreading this evening. I had a question. The guest had spoke about man-made climate change and kind of gave some figures where he thought maybe 10, 15% is what we attribute, and correct me if I'm wrong. But my question kind of is is as follows. The mainstream media likes to say that basically all scientists, or at least all scientists that have their heads screwed on straight, say that climate change is primarily from man-made sources, i.e., carbon, CO2. My question is this just a lie that's being regurgitated? The guest said that it's political. I'm wondering, are these scientists just regurgitating what their colleagues are saying, or is what's the motivation to perpetuate that? Is it out of ignorance? Is it just strictly political? What's your take on that?
I love to answer this question. Half of our audience tonight's not going to like it, but it's the truth. Follow the money. I'm sorry, but it's all about greed. And unfortunately, to those who are more open-minded, to young professors, to those young graduate students who are serious and kind of no nonsense, unfortunately, the suppliers of grant money, and so many of our young scientists rely on grant money. Is that they have to go? They're kind of driven down a certain path. I would follow the money. I'd say a lot of it is political. Not that it's all bad. I mean, I know of nobody, not one person who is pro-pollution. It's not about pro-pollution. That's crazy. Who wants pollution? No one does.
Right. Well, that whole 97% myth, or a stat that 97% of all scientists believe in man-made global warming. That started back in, I think it was 2009, and it was a university student and her advisor. They polled. It was only about 160 scientists, and only 5% of those 160 scientists were climate scientists. So that's where we got that 97%.
Don't get me started on that. It's science has been taken hostage. It's really sad. But that's kind of what's happening. And their ploy is really it's a military it's a strategy, a military strategy, and that's win the hearts and minds. And that's what they've been doing. Having said that, I support Obama and his thing. I mean, he did it wrong. Not just him, but I mean the concept it was misdirected. But he was trying to get the United States healthy by being the number one developer of alternative energies. I think that's great, and I certainly understand what he was doing. I'm all for that. I have no problem with that. It's a great concept. Again,
but the government can't pick the winners and losers, though. You have to let market forces decide that, and it's pretty effective.
Yeah, it is.
All right, let's go west of the Rockies. Bill is in Northern California. Bill, good morning. Welcome to Coast.
Hi there, Mitch. I got a question for you.
Sure.
What effect do you think the Maunder minimum would have on the Earth's magnetic field?
Could you repeat that, Richard, for me, please?
I think he's talking about low periods of low sun activity, low sunspot activity. Is that right? Do I have it right, Bill?
Yes, Mitch. I'm talking about we are approaching the low point of the solar cycle now. We're probably about 2 or 3 years away. There has been hypotheses about us approaching a Maunder minimum, an extended period of low solar energy affecting the Earth. What effect do you think a possible Maunder minimum would have on the Earth's geomagnetic field?
That's a great question, because I think the last time that happened, Mitch, we had the Little Ice Age, didn't we?
That's right. That certainly contributed to that. Yes, that would be a part of the trend. However, remember the solar cycle. There's cycles within cycles. So it depends if he's referring to a simple 11 or 22 year cycle. it certainly has a significant effect in that low sunspot activity will contribute to a larger amount of cosmic rays coming in, of radiation, and that has a significant effect on our planet and us.
All right, Mitch, we got to take a time out. Here's Mercy by Duffy. One name for the song, one name for the artist. Taking us into the break, back with more of your questions and comments for Mitch Battros from The Science of Cycles right here on. Just a reminder, you can listen to my weekly syndicated radio program, The Conspiracy Show, Sunday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern on Zoomer Radio in Toronto. And we also have about 32, I think we're up to, 32 affiliates throughout the United States and Canada. For a full list of radio stations near you, just go to strangeplanet.ca, click on the radio page, and then go to the affiliates page. You can also take the show with you on your mobile device by downloading the Conspiracy Show app. Again, the Conspiracy Show app from Google Play and the Apple Store. Back to your questions and calls for Mitch Battros from The Science of Cycles right here on Coast to Coast AM. And we are back with Mitch Battros, The Science of Cycles. Mitch, the Mayans were all about measuring cycles. They had so many different calendars. They had short count calendars that measured gestation periods and crop rotation. And they had, of course, the long count calendar, which was a 5,126 year cycle. They were so in tune with cycles. What did they know? Did they have an idea about cosmic rays, or what were they on about?
Wow, that is another great question, Richard. I think it has to come down to two possibilities. One is some advanced civilization or some entities from another world have came and gave them this knowledge, or that the Mayans are much older than we think. Maybe they're not 5,000 years old. Maybe they've been around for 10,000. Maybe they've been around for 20,000 years. I think it has to be one of the two. It does. It certainly is plausible to collect that type of history and knowledge. If it was passed down over centuries or literally thousands of years, yes, they could do that. So, same with the Egyptians. Another idea is that the Mayans, Aztecs, and several others, maybe they did communicate with the Egyptians. Maybe there was interaction between different cultures, and collectively they gathered this. I think that's one certain possibility, and the other one would be certainly harder to explain, that it was passed down to them. However, whichever of the two ways that they got it, they did it, and it's damn accurate. And let me tell you, I used to do interviews. When I started with television and then went to radio, and I brought all these scientists from NASA, NOAA, European Space Agency, Naval Observatory, the Royal Observatory, all of them. I brought them all on the show, and I guess not surprisingly, they wouldn't go public. And although I did ask them, what credence, what gravity did you give to ancient text with what we know today? They wouldn't, especially those highly connected with the agencies, wouldn't comment. But off the record, I say it. I can speak a little more freely now because in the last 5 years, it's like they've been given permission, and they're starting to come out. That many then, I'm talking 15, 20 years ago, off the record, and you know what that means. They certainly did believe in such things heavily. That much of what they know, well, then I don't know about today, but much of what they knew 20 years ago did in fact come from ancient text.
Well, we just learned recently on this show, Mitch, that Carl Sagan, for years, kept his firm belief in the ancient alien theory under wraps for fear of retribution, because NASA was the only game in town in terms of funding his research, and he thought that if he spoke out about it, he wrote papers about it, or a paper that was quashed, and ever after he was silent on the issue, pretty much.
Yes. Yes, that's certainly consistent with my experience. Hopefully things have loosened up, and they're maybe coming forward a little bit more. Just maybe a general unfolding, and just kind of a little aside to that, because I just happened to see the movie last week, or during the holidays. The movie's called Interstellar.
Yes.
I can't remember the actor's name. Hollywood movie called Interstellar. It was fascinating. So if anybody in the audience, if you haven't seen the movie Interstellar, I'd suggest it, because what they talk about it is relativity, if you will. The setting basically is Earth is dying, so they had to send. They had the technology. This is maybe 100 years from now. They had technology to send astronauts to not just to Saturn, but they went into a wormhole to another galaxy. Anyway, I won't go any further than that. That's a whole other story. But it was very insightful. To me, it was kind of a combination of ancient text and of what we know about that, and the idea that something may have been brought forward to them, and it was mixed with some real hard scientific abilities that we have today.
Right. Well, sometimes I think that there's a slow, controlled leak on UFO disclosure coming out of Hollywood. Sometimes, we get it in little dribs and drabs. Let's go west of the Rockies, and I think we found that call from Alaska you were looking for earlier, Mitch. Eric is in Beaver Lakes, Alaska. Eric, welcome to Coast. How are you?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Thank you for hosting, Richard, and
my pleasure.
You, Mitch. I survived the Great 64 earthquake, which was a 9.3.
That was in Fairbanks, wasn't it?
Well, it was throughout all of Alaska, and bookshelves went over in California, by my understanding. I was a little boy at the time. But anyway, he was talking about Bogoslav.
Yes.
But this is an island that is forming. It's been in the process of forming, and so it spews magma, and it is forming. And also, I wanted to say that he is right, but he may be more right than he realizes about the effects of ash, volcanic ash. It is extremely dirty. It is glass-like and crystalline. It is terrible on the motor on your car or truck.
I'll bet.
It's terrible for a human to breathe in. But I want to comment. I do have a question. I want to get his comment about the effects of volcanic ash on our abundant plant life. And here's what happens. The volcano will go off and spew ash. And we have many. There's Pavlov, there's Veniaminov, there's Bogoslav. They're usually Russian named, and I can't name them all. But it depends on which way the wind is blowing when it goes off. And sometimes it'll go off and then come into Anchorage, which really affects people. And we have to wear masks and stuff like that. But when the ash settles down on our abundant plant life, here's what happens. The moose and the caribou, of course, eat the plants, and this glass crystalline ash, which is on the plants, is just terrible on their teeth. And there have been cases where moose have gone into malnutrition because their teeth are so ground down from the volcanic ash. And I wanted to ask your guest, what does he think about that?
Wow, that's fascinating, Eric. Absolutely fascinating. Mitch, volcanic ash.
thank you for the information, and I've seen some pictures of the 1964 event, and there's a couple of videos out there. Maybe it's up on YouTube, but 20 years ago, not many people got to see it. And you can literally see the road is rolling up and down. I'm talking about a road lifting 3 meters. 3 meters. It was like a roller coaster. Unbelievable the power of a 9.0 or larger earthquake. Unbelievable. Now, the effects of the ash, not only is it the ash, it's the carbon dioxide. I'd say Richard is pretty much spot on. It's about 2 to 3 years of the pollution that we could produce, the world could produce. Well, at least that's my statistic of about 10 years ago. Maybe it's a little shorter time. But it's an enormous amount of not only the ash, but the carbon dioxide. And you bring up a good point about the effects on animal and plant life. To a smaller degree, certainly not a payoff, not worth the payoff, is some of the ash is actually good for the terrain. But I don't think it probably doesn't balance out with the negative part of it.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for the call from Beaver Lakes, Alaska. Let's go wild card line. Gordon is in Lakeland, Florida. Good morning, Gordon. Welcome to Coast.
Thank you for taking my call, Richard. Mitch, basically, I have a theory that digging into the ground causes pockets and holes, and it has caused earthquakes. And I was wondering, it's basically just 3 real short but very difficult questions. 1, what is the cause of the magnetic field collapse? Number 2, what can we do to cure it? Maybe build an electromagnet. Number 3, how long will the field be down? In other words, will it be down for a few weeks, and will it be dangerous enough that when the field is down and the cosmic rays come in, could it kill us, or will we survive it? So basically, what's the cause, what's the cure, and then how long will it be down?
Great questions, Gordon. And you also mentioned digging in the ground causing earthquakes, which would lead us, I guess, naturally to a discussion about fracking, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Let me take his last point first. The cause is charged particles, the various charged particles. There's a spectrum. The largest of the charged particles is a solar particle, such as solar flares and so forth. And I'm only talking about size. The smaller the cosmic rays is the smallest of the particles, but most deadly, literally. So if I heard the question correctly, I can't tell you what the exact time sequence would be as far as the weakening of the magnetic field. As I understand it, it would drop down to almost 0 point, not quite there. It would have to come close in order for it to make a flip. And that is when the Earth would be most vulnerable to radiation, to various charged particles. But first it's going to bounce around, and we're talking about a few years of bouncing around, including dipping down to the equator. And then in the last stages, which I'm not exactly sure what the timeline would be, that it would drop almost 90 degrees and then bounce back, and that would be it'd be a rapid bounce, almost like you're bouncing a basketball or something. It'd be rapid, and then shortly after that.
Oh, did we lose Mitch? I think we lost Mitch. All right. Well, while we work feverishly to get Mitch back on the line, let me thank, let's see, who do we have up near next? Jeff is in Culver City on the wild card line. Jeff in Culver City, welcome to Coast to Coast. How are you?
Yeah, hi, Richard. Happy New Year to you and Mr. Battros.
Happy New Year,
when
Jeff.
He comes back. When I was married to my wife, who was a Guatemalan native, she told me that the history of the Mayans and its descendants were all connected to and inspired by aliens. She called them UFOs, but, we know them as UFOs. and she claimed that the aliens brought the Mayans the knowledge to do whatever it is, they were to do to build their civilization. But my question, was this to Mr. Battros, and when he come back, he'd probably ask him, the knowledge and technology that was once given to ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and others seem to have dissipated over the hundreds and thousands of years. Yet in our own time, for example, just in the last 117 years in America, we went from a papier-mâché aircraft built by the Wright brothers to space shuttles, space stations, and SpaceX rocket launchers. And I'm wondering, do we have this alien technology and, certain people in our government just keeping it secret? Because only in 117 years we went from a papier-mâché aircraft to space shuttles and rockets being launched by Elon Musk and SpaceX. So, I just want to ask him that.
Right, and look at the leap we went from tubes in radios to solid state. I mean, and that seemed to happen overnight. There was no sort of intermediary stage, or I may be mistaken about that, but I just remember one day it was tubes, we woke up the next and it was solid state. Remember the transistor radio? Where did that come from? All right, we have Mitch back, and I don't know if you were able to hear much of Jeff's question, and even if you did, I'm not sure it's really sort of in your purview, but he was talking about the Mayans and I guess sort of alluding to the ancient alien theory, wondering if you think that certain technological advances that we're experiencing now, he cited in 117 years, we went from the Wright brothers to, putting man on the moon and beyond, the shuttle program and so forth, whether you think this century we've had a technological sort of kick in the pants from aliens.
I don't know the answer to that, Richard. That's a great question. I certainly keep an open mind. One possibility could be a type of synchronicity, a synergy. I think of the age of the computer. That seemed to happen overnight. Bill Gates got the information from IBM, really, and then I forgot his partner's name. I should know these things. He's right here in my backyard. Wrote some code for it to initiate, and then I'm mentioning this is to highlight a very rapid swing. We got Jobs who's in the garage doing his Mac. We've got Gates doing his thing in his garage, and that to me seemed like a kind of an overnight thing as well. Sometimes there's I call it a point of critical mass, where we're trudging along at a certain pace, and then something happens, and then there's this leap. But I kind of like your idea better. That where if it didn't happen that way, not to be black and white about it, but then I think we should be open to possibly help from somewhere
alien
else.
Intervention. Right. Well, when we come back, it begs another question. Speaking of cosmic rays and cycles, and whether or not certain human behaviors, particularly in the field of economics, some suggest are informed by cycles. Some take advantage of those cycles. Can human behavior be affected by cosmic rays? Back with more of our conversation with Mitch Battros, The Science of Cycles, and your questions and calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Over 75 years ago, a young economist from Harvard, along with some of the world's top scientists, set out to unravel a mystery. The economist was Edward R. Dewey. He was the chief economist for President Herbert Hoover at the beginning of the Great Depression. And Hoover assigned Dewey the task of determining the cause of the Depression. Now, in January of 1941, the Foundation for the Study of Cycles was incorporated in Connecticut, and it was dedicated to discovering the mystery behind cycles. Since then, the Foundation has been working to shed light on this mystery, the Depression, that is, but not the only one. Dewey discovered that it wasn't the first time in the U.S. economy that they suffered a depression. In fact, it had done so with some regularity. So, after seeking out the opinions of economists, he realized the only answer they could give him were conflicting opinions with very little insight. Repeatedly, Dewey was led to the door of cycles. Cycles synchrony. While conducting some research at Stanford Library, Dewey encountered a report on biological cycles. As he read the report, he realized that the cycles biologists had identified in nature were in fact identical in both length and timing to those he had described in business and stocks. The implications of this discovery were to change his life, along with the lives of many others who would follow him. We'll discuss more on the science of cycles with Mitch Battros on the other side. Stay with us. Welcome back to Coast. Richard Syrett coming to you from Coast Toronto Affiliate Talk Radio, AM 640. Mitch, before the break, or during that last floating break, I was mentioning the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, started by President Hoover. And this economist Dewey realized there was this underlying cycle, these underlying cycles that not only influenced biology, but also human behavior. And I'm wondering, you're studying cycles as they pertain to climate change and earth changes. Is it possible that the cycles that are responsible for all of these things, human behavior and earth changes, and they're all caused by something out there?
Well, I'd go further and say it's a fact. More recently, in the last 15 years, there is a process. It's a modem that is being used pretty significantly. Insurance covers it. That treat anything from depression to schizophrenia or milder variations of mental health issues. And what they use, it's an item called transcranial magnetic stimulation. So they're using magnetic stimulation to affect humans. If that's true, and it is, and it's being used quite often now, because the harshness of electrical shock treatment, of course, would be just horrible, most severe. Rarely used now, but all the antidepressants and any of the medications that are often being used have often negative effects of one sort or another. The transcranial magnetic stimulation, known as TMS, does not, and it goes directly to the question of does magnetic flux have an influence not only on Earth, but on humans? The answer is absolutely. So, how far have they gone to signify such a connection? They're tippy-toeing around it. They're not fully. I come from the world where I have to do peer reviews. And for anybody out there who has had to go through a peer review, they just shred you. You better have your facts down and really have the documentation to back it up, because I don't discredit it. It's absolutely necessary. It's a filtering process to kind of toss away the not so significant stuff with really tangible, important things.
Agreed. But unfortunately, like everything else, that whole process, the peer review process, in many cases has become politicized.
That is true. That's a very good point, Richard. I'm going back a few years before it took hold, and it hadn't even 15 years ago. It really hadn't filtered into other areas, not that I was aware of anyway, other than what I noticed the most in climate. However, your point is well taken. Certainly that could be an aspect. But anyway, I just said that to let people understand that it just takes time. I think I as a journalist, I can come forward and put both feet in it and say there is a definite causal effect. But when I try to get, some of the main scientists that come from the most known agencies, it's hard to get them to confirm. But the studies, just the one that you mentioned, are incredibly significant. And it goes, actually, look, if you know anything about acupuncture, what an acupuncturist works with is energy, is magnetics in part. We are energy, and we have these what we call meridians. What's a meridian? I'd say it's a magnetic flux, a place of balancing energy. Chi, Qui, Kai, Prana, Gaia, the force, whatever you want to call it. This has been known for thousands of years. We're just kind of putting a modern terminology to it. I think it's always been there, and it is it good or bad? That's a good. I wrote articles about that some years back, and then I said that as the magnetic field weakens, and this happened to be a period of during the early 2000s, we were in a solar maximum, and people were wondering, well, how's it it has effect on us as humans? And I said, look, for some people, it's going to be a positive effect, that they get energy and clarity out of it, that somehow harmony comes. Others, it's just the opposite, that they experience more depression and so forth. And I mentioned that to encompass this idea of balance. Where each person is individually, I don't know how it's going to affect them, but I will say it will affect them.
Well, if human behavior is affected by these cycles, by cosmic rays, if, for example, we have predictable cycles for those in the know, wink, wink, about the economy, and I'm guessing that there are groups of people that have made untold riches because they understand these cycles. But does this not lend some credence to the idea of astrology?
I don't know about astrology. Maybe astronomy.
The early mathematicians, people like Pythagoras, they were astrologers too. They studied the radionics of spheres. Now, I don't know if that has anything to do with cosmic rays, but when you have, these planetary, these heavenly bodies sort of interacting with each other, there must be some electromagnetic effect, and I'm wondering if that could also explain cycles in things like human behavior, and then that does point back to astrology. Now, mind you, it's not very precise. Much of that knowledge has probably been lost by modern astrologists. But I don't know. To me, I think there might be a connection.
I would say here's our common ground. Is that we don't know which effect it's going to have an effect on the person. Sure, I've been to astrologists. It's pretty cool. But every astrologist that I spoke to, it was always a yin and yang. It could go this way or it could go that way. So it's hard. How do you know if these certain events? Let's from an astronomer point of view, when there's alignments or these events that I speak of related to charged particles, is it going to have a positive effect or a negative effect on a person? I don't know if we really know that. I think it could be either or. Now, to your question about economists, there's no whispering about it. I've been approached. They're dead serious about it. They are knowing of these events. Now they look at it from both points of view. The ones that approached me were more interested in the weather. But we're talking about people who wanted to know about the solar cycles and, where are we and what's expected and would the crops grow this way or that way. But then there were others who were in commodities in precious metals in particular. Do you think the energy, the people are going to want to buy more, or will we have some kind of downfall? I don't have the answer to it, and I told them that. I had more answers for weather. I could tell them about patterns of what might be expected. But when it got to commodities, I'm going to pass that to you.
Well, I think these are the modern-day alchemists. I think these are the people. I don't think there are a lot of them, but these are the very rich and the very powerful, and I think they know how these cycles work as it pertains to certain human activities. All right.
I think you're onto something.
Wildcard line, Dan is in Northern California. Dan, welcome to Coast.
Hi there. Question for Mitch?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Mitch, I love your topic because I love the idea of cycles within our solar system. But the one specific question I had was regarding earthquakes and the appearance of lightning at earthquakes. And I think I have an explanation for that.
All right, Dan, let's hear it.
Okay, let's look at the New Zealand earthquake in November. You imagine you're sitting on the coast of New Zealand, the western coast of the Southern Island, looking eastward, and the earthquake hits. Within less than 1 second, at the speed of sound, 2 plates off the coast of that beach move 30 feet at the speed of sound at the depth of 9 miles. The energy released when that happens affects the atmosphere over the Earth, and you get a plasma effect, a flash that occurs. This was recorded at the New Zealand earthquake, and I'm sure as a year or two pass by, I'll have a lot more documentation.
All right, Dan, thank you for that. Well, I think you were sort of alluding to that earlier, Mitch. You were sort of explaining.
No. He's speaking of something else, and he's right on. There's no wishy-washy about this. This is part of science. It has a name. They're called sprites. That's the name for it. It's called a sprite, just SPRIT. And this is a phenomena that they're getting more familiar with and learning, and it's directly related to charged particles and related to earthquake events and so forth. It goes up into the atmosphere, and it basically has the form of a lightning storm. There's not a lot of information about it. The information I'm gathering is coming from Goddard Space Weather Center. They're familiar with it, and they're realizing that again, that connection between the sun and beyond, that these charges, if you will, have an interaction between the ionosphere, the atmosphere, and even beyond up into the thermosphere.
Is it similar to Aurora Borealis?
It might. No.
All right.
No.
You were almost on board, and then no. Okay. Eddie,
I'm looking at, visually. It would look more like a thunder, like a lightning storm.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the wild card line again. Eddie's in El Paso, Texas. Eddie, good morning.
Hello, Richard.
Hi there.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for taking my call. This is a very interesting topic. Mitch, I want to thank you for your research, and God bless you, sir, because this is very interesting. I just have one question. In regards to your previous discussion regarding earthquakes, pole shift, and the climate change, and mainly what am I trying to say? Regarding the tectonic plate shifts, you mentioned, Mitch, that you didn't see anything that would be like really disastrous as far as that area. My question is, in your opinion, what do you think if something like that was to happen? Would that affect our
Yellowstone caldera. I'll take my answer off the air.
Eddie, thank you for that. Good question. All right. So a magnetic or a pole shift, could that set off the Yellowstone caldera? We got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes here.
The short answer is yes. So let me clarify. What I was talking about was a huge a momentum where there's actual crustal. When I mean by crustal displacement is that the world turns literally. It rotates. No, that's a no. Will there be significant events occurring as this process goes along? Absolutely. We will see an increase in all the phenomena, all the way from extreme weather events such as straight line winds and microbursts and so forth, as well as earthquake and volcano activity. This is the Earth finding its balance. It's always done it. It gets out of balance, and there's bulges are created, or there's literal bulges occur in the Earth, which has a direct causal effect with the magnetics. And sometimes it overheats, and sometimes it gets too cold, and it goes back to trying to find its ambient temperature. And as a consequence of those events, we have all this phenomena. It's just that there's a lot of people on the Earth right now that are watching it, and we can all report about it with our phones.
Mitch, leave us with the website, and also, is there a newsletter, or how do you communicate with people?
Well, first of all, Rich, I want to say this was a lot of fun. You're a great host. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
Yeah, you bet. It's the website is scienceofcycles.com. I've had other companies. I had Earth Changes Media for many years, and now I've switched into as we've discussed throughout the night, focusing on the cycles that take us to our galaxy and beyond. And yes, I do have a newsletter. The newsletter's free, and up until 2 weeks until January 15th. You can go to the website free. We're not going to go. We have to switch over on January 15th to a small fee for members that can have access to my research.
All right, scienceofcycles.com. Mitch, I gotta say goodbye, but thank you. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thank you for hanging out.
You're welcome.
Mitch Battros, scienceofcycles.com. For George Noory, George Knapp, Lisa Lyons, Stephanie Smith, Tom Danheiser, Dan Galati, Chris Burrows, Lex Lonehood, Juan Velasquez, Donna Walker, and here in Toronto, Scott Guest, Tom Schenk, and Nathan Smith, I'm Richard Syrett. Thanks for your ears and your voices, your beautiful voices.